Welcome to Prophets of Babel with your host, Janine. Today we are reading the book of Rashan, and the first book in that is the book of Terath. It is quite long, so we will break it up into two parts. Enjoy today's version. The book of Rashan, a testimony of the children of Naphtali. How the book was received. This is a record dictated by the Holy Spirit, received through the hearing of the inner voice, I being the seer and hearer through whom this record was obtained, upon a prompting that a record might come, entered into a deep state of receptivity and began channeling the words that followed on November 16th, 2019. Occasionally, in my inner sight, I viewed imagery that accompanied the text, which played out as the words were recorded. The words came line upon line without stopping for breaks or reviewing what had been written. There was no foreknowledge of what would come, but rather I was deeply focused only upon what was being written or given at the time. When half the record had been obtained, I stopped to pray and sleep. Upon waking, the reception resumed immediately as before, and I received the remainder of the record. Again, I did not go back to read anything that was written the previous night, but continued from where I left off without interruption until the text was completed. After receiving the record in full, I read through it again and corrected any typos and adjusted the spelling of names which were foreign and which I attempted to record as I heard them, but did not make any other changes to the text, which then appears as it does in this present edition. In addition to the first book of Terath, I received a few words from a book called The Words of Rashan, and also understood that this would be the first. Should I be worthy and willing of a series of books that will guide us in our understanding and application of the law of the Lord, and also fill in some gaps in our religious history. Though I immediately desired to share the text I received with others, I had no prompting to do so, but was confident that at a time would come to share it with others. And I was content to wait. Instead, I kept the text in my heart and read it many times, pondering its relevance and learned from it things that helped me understand other similar works and their place in the larger collection of sacred inspired literature. The book of Terath, taken from the book of Rashan. Terath, an Israelite of northern Israel, is raised in the book of the law and commits himself to study and contemplation. He feels a spiritual prompting that the people understand to be the call to the ministry. Verse 1. I, Rashan, being a descendant of Terath, the son of Termer, the son of Gimner, began to give an account of my father from what I have ascertained from his writings and our traditions. For he was a descendant of the lands possessed by the children of Israel, even to the north of Jerusalem, it being in the days before the destruction brought on by the Babylonians. And these were days of peace and prosperity, and the rulers of the people being content with the blessings of the Lord and the way of the world as to the manner of the flesh, and there being none among the 15 tribes of the land that waged war on each other, or that complained mightily to the Lord. But there were disputes among the lower classes and the impoverished, but there was not much in the way of public discourse that could acknowledge or express this dissatisfaction widely among all Israel at this time, for this was a time of prosperity. And it came to pass that our father Terath, being an educated merchant of trade among the northern cities and Jerusalem, was an expert traveler and associate of many connections across the kingdom. And he, having been brought up in the ways of trade and having been seasoned in his craft by his father, was shrewd and cunning and gathered some influence, and also was known among some of the principal people of the kingdom. Wherefore he was not one of anxiety for the state of his soul, being both a Hebrew and a wealthy man, and he had 3 wives and 4 sons in his 30th year, and daughters, and also had a father and mother living, and 6 brothers and sisters. And this man, Terath, counted himself blessed and worried for nothing in the days of peace and prosperity, and notwithstanding, there being many in those days who cried out for poverty and injustice, they were paid no mind. And this our father was not among the wicked, as ye shall see, for he had yet to open his mind to the Spirit of the living one, to see that which is beyond mortal eyes to see. And Terath conducted himself in trade and business, but he obtained from marketing in human flesh, or of lending against the law of usury. But in one case, that of Artemish the slave, did he market in flesh. And this Artemish was offered in the payment of a debt that could not be paid by one of the tribe of Dan, by name of Yehida. And Terath was angry at Yehida for his deceit and failure thereof, and he accepted Artemish as payment of the debt. And Artemish knew not what to do with a slave, for he had no use for a slave, having 3 wives and children besides, and therefore could only sell him for payment to remit the debt. And it came to pass that he sold him to Ephorah, the Edomite. Now it came to pass that Artemish pleaded not to be sold, and proposed an indentured servitude, in which he could buy his freedom and depart his way. But Terath rebuffed his proposals and sold him to the Edomite. And thus Terash was alleviated of Artemish the slave, and returned home much relieved. And it came to pass that Terash awoke in the early hours of the night, and could not sleep. And he continually thought about Artemish, and several things he said, being things that would burden Terash, but would prevent Artemish from being sold. And in none of these things did Terash see any benefit to his purse, to allow Artemish to buy his freedom through labor, notwithstanding that he promised Terath to work for him above that which a slave may be expected to perform. And Terath slept without thought, but within the night Terath opened his eyes from a dream, in which he saw Artemish, and he called out in the midst of suffering and anguish. And Terath could not cease thinking of Artemish, and who would come to possess him, and how they might extract his labor. Now this same Terath was a student of the law, being his father's son, who did all things to fulfill the duty of an Israelite, having known to follow the law, and also to labor with his hands to produce that which a man desires. And though he himself honored the law to not make of another man a servant without contract, he did not see any obligation where Artemish was concerned. But this Artemish filled his mind that he could not forget, and he began to feel remorse and to repent his transaction. And it came to pass that Terath agreed within himself to retract the contract of the sale of Artemish, and find some better resolution to obtain compensation. Chapter 2. And it came to pass that Terath left his bed, and stole out upon the night toward the market, that he would arrive before dawn, to find where he had left his servant. And no man knew where he had been transported to. And now this frustration filled Terath with more anxiety about what he had done. Wherefore he looked to God, and imagined that he had done some great evil, and brought suffering upon the poor, and curses upon himself. And according to his own words, being Terath of Naphtali, in that which he wrote in his priesthood scroll, saying, O wretched man that I am, in the refuse of flesh, for I have put myself above another flesh, to inherit that which my vanity createth, and I torment for that which I must offer up, whether myself or that which bringeth my body comfort. And this ancestor of ours must have felt sincerity of soul, for his prayer of heart was answered in the spirit of comfort, which came upon him and eased him. And it came to pass that Terath was partly assured regarding this Artemish, and still anxious to know his whereabouts. And several merchants came through in the morning, and Terath stopped them to inquire. And they said only little regarding the slave's location, wherefore Terath renewed his determination to find the lad. And having found the location of the slave, Terath changed his demeanor, and forgot his anxiety, and bartered for the ownership of the slave. And the owner of Artemish was undesirous to sell the slave, Wherefore Terath began to barter for ownership, and the price that the man sought was double that which he had paid. Terath, being angry, returned home without the slave. And it came to pass that Dariah, the head wife of Terath, being shrewd and also concerning herself and all the interest of her husband, became concerned for his troubles and brooding demeanor. Wherefore she said unto him, Why troublest thou for a slave, husband? We have no shortage of labor because of our sons and daughters, and also our wives. Terath answered her, saying, Behold, I had a dream in the night, in which the slave called out because of his suffering, and I remembered his desires to be put to his freedom after 7 years. Now Dariah was the more concerned because of dreams, which indicate a sickness of the mind, for no one concerns themselves because of dreams who are well. And Dariah sought to ease her husband, saying, Behold, thou art a wealthy man, because of your own labor and profit in business. Wherefore thou art rightfully deserving to be the head of a home in Israel, and enjoy the life that God gave you, which is better than any other man, and you can in no way alter the lot that has fallen to them, which is the place of God alone. And this man Yehida is a wicked man, and through treachery did he lay this burden of slaves upon you, which thou didst never agree to, being a just and humble merchant. And I know that you do not desire to traffic in human flesh, wherefore this evil is not charged to your account, but to Yehida, who sought to pay his debts with flesh. Now I have only a desire for that which is thine, being the debt that Yehida was bound to pay, and for that you were pressed to further labor at your hands to convert the slave, which you did not want, into the payment of the debt. Wherefore you are all the more entitled to that which you received. Fear not, therefore, over your conscience. Terath thanked her and went about his business, but continually thought on the problem of Artemish. And on the following day he went back to Euphora and inquired again about the slave. And Euphora was a hard man on his servants, and this all the more concerned Terath because of the welfare of Artemish. But Yehida would not agree to a lesser sum, and that which he required was unreasonable for any slave. Terath therefore went home again without the slave. And Dariah found out from her son where Terath had been, and again persisted in the matter, saying, Is it not against that which you believe to purchase slaves? Would you be a slaveholder? Now before this time, Terath knew his own business, and was not accustomed to having his affairs supervised by his wife. Wherefore he said unto her, Silence, woman. Now Dariah had never known her husband to be aught but that which is sensible and reasonable, and his concern for slaves set her at ease, being that she feared her husband being under a madness or a curse. Wherefore she went unto the wise woman. Now there was a wise woman who inhabited the hills away from the town of Bethshira, and it was in a place called by them Togath, which being interpreted means removed. And the wise woman was old, living only with her daughter, who was past the age of marriage. Now it was unlawful for any Israelite to visit the wise woman, notwithstanding they all did in secret, for there were many curses and misfortunes that were feared among them, and the wise woman sold many charms against such things. And because of this, the wise woman, whose name was Edna, and whose daughter was named Sephora, lived in comfort, even though they were removed from people, and being secluded, they had many visitors. And it was rumored among them that even the queens had visited the wise woman. And Sephora was also a wise woman, like unto her mother, and she could tell a person their fortune, and all things that were written about that person among the stars, and also could make shields and protections and alter fates. And it came to pass that Dariah told unto Edna all things that had transpired in her household, and sought the advice of Edna. And Edna consulted with her daughter, and reported back that evil was to befall Dariah and all her household, and that she would become impoverished. And it came to pass that a great fear took hold of Dariah, for this was the very cause of her anxiety. And Edna also prophesied that Terath would cease his occupation of merchandising and become a wanderer in barren places. And also Sephora proclaimed that the slave Artemis would replace Doriah in the heart of Terath. Now Doriah became anxious to alter this fate, and she sought what to do of the wise woman. And they told her that this fate was written and difficult to change. And also Terath was on a course known to the heavens already, and would not change easily from what he was to do. And Doriah gave the woman all that she had brought with her, and would regard the price for their help as nothing. And Doriah asked what they could do to oppress the freedom of her husband from making foolish choices. And they said that he could be brought under a curse to control his mind. But this was not their occupation, for they made amulets for protection, not curses. And Doriah pleaded with them, saying that her household would be destroyed and her life of comfort would be no more, wherefore she needed their help. And they said to her, to provide a curse is costly, for anyone who makes a curse upon another must expect the misfortune also to return upon themselves. Wherefore the women must be compensated for the misfortune to come. And Doriah promised them compensation, and departed to her home to gather her possessions to lay them at the woman's feet. And again, with her daughters and her son, Doriah departed to the lair of the wise woman. And it came to pass that the woman performed unspeakable rituals, and called upon deities and spirits of the oppression of the mind of Terath, and also made magical elixirs for the purposes of Doriah. And Doriah returned to her home and administered of the elixirs unto her husband without his awareness. And it came to pass that his madness increased, wherefore he was determined to obtain the slave, for his health departed, and he was left to his bed. And Doriah knew that all that the woman said would come to pass, wherefore she continued with the administration of the poison. Chapter 4. Now this Terath wrote in his scroll, which is called by him the obtaining of the priesthood. For ye shall see that this Terath would become a priest unto God, notwithstanding he being not a Levite. And this was another kind of sacrifice that was known anciently before Moses, and was also known unto the Persians. But at this time Terath was a merchant and worshipped gold. Notwithstanding, he gave of it to the temple and the priest. And it came to pass that Terath was concerned for his health, and also attributed his condition to the evil spirits, who sought to prevent him from redeeming the slave. Wherefore he sent his son Gonet to call the priest to administer to him. Now Gonet was also the son of Doriah, and as he was about to depart on his father's mission, his mother stopped him, and had him take money to spend on himself, and return a message that the priests were engaged. And it came to pass that this was what Gonet did, and the heart of Terath was grieved. Wherefore he sent him again to plead with them that someone of them might come and administer to him a blessing from the Lord. And he gave him monies to offer in the temple, and also to buy sacrifices to the Lord. And the priest might come, and that God might save him. And again, also did Doriah convince Gonet to spend the money on himself, and to lie unto his father. And this Gonet did. Wherefore this began to corrupt his heart, and teach him in the ways of dishonesty and gain. Now the condition of his father grieved the heart of Terethia, who was the daughter of Terath's second wife, Begonia. And also she suspected what was in the heart of Gonet, her brother. Wherefore she was about to depart for the temple priests, but was stopped by her first mother, Doriah. Now the first wife of a man was also the head wife, and the mother of all the household, notwithstanding a descendant be of whatever birth mother they be, and all the house owed primary loyalty to her. For this reason she was also called first mother. And the firstborn son of the head wife is the heir of all the house, notwithstanding he may be the second or third son of his father. And this was owing to the status of the head wife. And this was not according to law, but according to custom. Wherefore it was understood by all. And Terathea asked her mother Dariah what they shall do, seeing that father is ill unto death. And it came to pass that Dariah lied unto Terathea and said that she had been to see a prophet, and he had prophesied that all was well, and that in no way shall her father perish. But God has hindered him from his temporary madness, lest he should jeopardize his household and purchase a slave. Now Terathea feared this eventuality also, but she knew that Dariah had not visited the prophet, but had gone to Togoth. Nevertheless, she was obedient to her mother Dariah and withdrew, and would not speak anything to her mother Vagonia, for she was also owed obeisance to Dariah. Now Terathea knew nothing about the magic and curses of the wise woman had concocted, but she knew that their fortune telling, and in her heart she knew that a wise woman was not the same as a prophet of Israel. Nevertheless, she too feared the wise women, and regarded that whatsoever they predicted was known to come true. Nevertheless, she sought the blessings of the priest, because the God of Israel might regard their blessings above the protection of wise women. Wherefore she sought permission to worship in the temple of Bethshira, as she would often do. Wherefore Dariah gave her leave to take her brother Terath to the temple. Now she could not tell Terath what she intended, for he would also not be disobedient. Wherefore she spent tedious hours in prayer for her father, until his patience was at an end. And he said, How long shall you pray for father? Surely God hath heard thee by now. And Terathea exclaimed that she would remain until God answered her prayer and healed Terath. Now it was not fitting that a young woman should be left alone, and the girl was persistent in her desires for her father. Wherefore Terath was sympathetic and would not order her home, but he pleaded with her that Terath would be better served by her at his bedside. Nevertheless, she persisted and suggested that he leave her to occupy himself at his pleasure. Therefore Terath reasoned with the girl that the girl could do no harm in the temple, nor come to any. Therefore he departed and promised to return shortly. Now this was what Terathea desired, and she immediately sought out to speak to the priest. Chapter 5. Now the servants of the temple could not administer to the sick, and all the priests of the temple were busy and would not stop to see a woman all alone, wherefore none would see her. At this, Terathea was disheartened and prayed the more for God to open a way for her. And she was about to give up on her intention, but recalled the prophet that had passed in the marketplace. And it came to pass that Terathea departed the temple alone and went into the market to speak with the prophet. And it came to pass that Terathea found the prophet still speaking and rejoiced in her heart. And the name of the prophet was Johann of the tribe of Yehudah. And he was a goodly man in all the ways of the Lord, and he never cut his hair. Nevertheless, he was clean in body and in mind in all the ways of the Lord. And the Lord smiled upon Terathea, for Johann would speak to a girl in the marketplace. Nevertheless, he inquired if she were lost. And Terathea spoke boldly and said, Indeed, though she knew her way home, and she prayed he hear her distress. And it came to pass that Johann told her, Speak on. And Terathea recounted all her troubles and her intrigue to obtain an audience with the priest on the account of her father. Now Johann was with the Spirit in all things, and he was a man of great perception and integrity. Wherefore he agreed to help her and left his audience straightway. And Terathea left him to return to the temple to wait for her brother, and Johann took with him 2 other servants of the Lord and went ahead unto the house of Terath. And it came to pass that Johann called out as he entered the house of Terath, and was met with Dariah, who asked them their business, saying, Doth my husband owe you merchandise? For he is sick upon his bed, and must rest, before he can return to his labors. And Johann replied that he was a prophet who preached in the marketplace, and that the Spirit of God moved him to come to the house of Terath, for he knew by prophecy that the householder lay sick. And Dariah did not want to permit him entrance, for she already knew of the true cause of Terath's condition. Wherefore she proclaimed that the priest had already come and blessed him and the house, and that she did not know the prophets. And Johann said unto her, Woman, trifle not with the God of the earth. And he walked by her. Now Doriah was stricken with fear, lest in any way the prophets curse her for her treachery. And she took the remainder of her jewels and prepared to depart with her son and her daughter unto the lair of the wise woman. Now Terath returned unto the temple before Terethia and searched everywhere for her and left. And those who cared for the temple reported to her that the young man had come and gone and was in distress for her well-being. And Terethia went out searching for Terath, and when at last she found him, he scolded her for leaving the temple. And she proclaimed that she had felt that God had answered her prayers regarding their father, and therefore she departed the temple to go looking for him. And Terath knew that he should not have left her. Wherefore they agreed among themselves that they would not mention any of it thereafter. And when they reached home, they met Doriah departing, who relayed that there were strange men there to see Terath, and inquired if the pair of them had been anywhere other than the temple, to which Terath replied, Nay. And moreover, Terath relayed that the girl refused to cease in prayer and refused to leave the temple, and they were overcome with exhaustion. Wherefore Doriah was satisfied and excused the pair and departed with her son and daughter unto Togath. Chapter 6. Now Terath welcomed the men of God to his bedside and prayed unto them for a blessing at their hands. And the men laid hands upon him and commanded him to overcome the evil that had befallen him. And Johann was filled with the Spirit and prophesied concerning Terath, saying, Thou child of man, art favored of the Lord, who in all your doings has watched thee and set his guardian spirit above thee. Thou art honest and just, and the Lord has renewed thee with his Spirit and the conscience of God and the feeling of response in regard to the God of Israel. Therefore stand firm in the way your heart directs you, for it is of the Lord, and take courage in doing good and using the gifts with which God has blessed you to serve him. Now Johann took hold of the man and lifted him out of bed, and Johann administered to him bread and soft wine for his strength, and gave him reassurance that he got up from his bed and accompanied them to make offerings in the temple. And Johann also proclaimed that the Lord had special work for Terath and his posterity, and to look out for it. And Terath gave money to the servants of God for their ministry, and they all went into the temple to make offerings to the poor and the temple fund. And Terethia rejoiced along with all their house. Now Terath had greatly feared because of his mind, and yet felt unwell, but had taken courage and assurance from Johann. For during his stupor, as he laid upon his bed, he had been plagued with demonic thoughts and fears. But with courage he made his way to the temple, and gave of his substance freely in thank offering. And the men of God stayed by his side, and helped him maintain his strength. And Terath returned into his house, and inquired after Doriah and his son and daughter. And it came to pass that Vagonia reported unto him that Doriah had departed these many times to see the prophets for his well-being, and that they prophesied to her of his recovery. And he found many of her things were also missing, which she had paid unto the prophets to obtain their blessing. And Terath also took of his money and went unto the house of Euphora the Edomite to barter for the redemption of Artemis. And Artemis had looked healthier and of brighter countenance in former days. And Euphora was loath to be bothered a third time about the matter of his slave, who was not for sale, and gathered the look and appearance of Terath, he raised his demand of the slave. This vexed the spirit of Terath, and he yet had to return home to obtain more money. And returning, he offered what had been asked, owing all to the will of God, that the words of Johann to follow his heart implied that the dream he had received of Artemis meant a commandment that he was to obey to redeem him. Now, Euphora perceived that some desperation was at play, and the strange behavior and appearance of Terath again raised his demand and would not be dissuaded. And Terath cried out against the injustice and said that it was the will of the Lord that he obtain the slave and allow him to work toward his eventual freedom. Now this pleased Euphora even more. Wherefore he said, God demands sacrifice of his favored servants, and he raised the price again. And what's more, he began to beat Artemis in the presence of Terath for some contrived reason. And it came to pass that once again Terath returned unto his house and gathered more of his possessions, and returned unto the house of Euphora, and placed all his demand at his feet. And Terath left with the slave Artemis, having paid more for his redemption than any slave in all Israel. Chapter 7. Now Dariah in the house of Edna in the land of Togoth sought how to remedy her misfortune. Wherefore she accounted the arrival of the men of God at her house. And it came to pass that Edna consulted with Sephora, and they proclaimed that the gods were not in her favor, and that they had proceeded with the misfortune of the house of Terath. And Dariah was overcome with grief and anxiety, wherefore she gave unto the women all she had brought with her, and pleaded they intervene with the gods. And Edna said, how can a mortal escape her fate and turn away the minds of the gods from their objective? And Dariah promised the remainder of her possessions, and also that she would collect of the other wives of Terath, would be relieved of his determination to be a wanderer and return to his labors as a merchant. And also, during the time of his illness, his business suffered, and some of those who came to him had made arrangements with other merchants. Wherefore it was necessary for him to return to work with greater determination to recover what was lost. And Edna regarded the woman's plight and promised to help. Wherefore Dariah returned into her house and gathered money and jewels from her sister wives. And also the wives gathered of their sons and daughters, saying, there is a great curse come upon the house of Terath, and the prophets must be bought to intervene with the God to avert their misfortune. And it came to pass that Dariah returned unto the wise woman and gave all she collected and returned home. Now upon returning, Dariah found the slave Artemis lounging about the garden, waiting for some work to be done. And Dariah railed against Terath for the purchase of the slave, who knows nothing of a trade or merchandising, and in a household full of women who performed all the labors of the household. And she said, moreover, you have paid a hefty sum for this slave, which you sold at a loss. And never before have you made an unwise transaction, but now have lost your mind because of a dream. Truly, there have been curses placed upon you and your house. And more, she said, do you not know that I have spent all that I have with the prophets to break the evil spell that has come over you, and to free your mind from this madness, and gather some from all in the house as well? And Terath answered, saying, the prophet Johann hath proclaimed all well, and that I am favored of the Lord, and given a spirit of conscience to be obedient, and also commanded to follow my heart. And Dariah answered, thou hast the heart of a fool, and my mother will grieve to know that I married a man of prospect, and standing only to have him abandon his wits to our ruin. Thy sons are in the marketplace, and thou art needed upon the road to acquire merchandise, if you still have the means, and take with you the worthless servant, that he may earn back a portion of what he has cost us. And it came to pass that Terath took Artemis and departed to Bath Noran to resume his business. Chapter 8. And it came to pass that after Terath obtained ownership of the servant Artemis, the anxiety which he had felt to find the lad disappeared. Wherefore he oppressed the lad for the uncertain pressure he had to reobtain him, and this led Terath to hate the lad for his suffering, seeing that he was not of much use for profit for his owner. And Terath did abuse Artemis like unto Euphora, for the sake of what Terath was taught of castes, and the god bestowed gifts of wealth and status. Wherefore he began to repent of his sacrifice and sorrows in obtaining him. And Artemis knew nothing how to be of service to Terath, and spoke Greek, which Terath also spoke. Therefore he could not be of use as a translator. And Terath began to contemplate selling him again, but did not, for the sake of what Johann had said. And now Terath had also taken an assessment of his estate, and considered that since the time of his first coming into possession of Artemis the slave, he had lost considerable holdings. And on the road to Bethnora, Terath's health returned to his body, and his mind was again his own, and he determined to regain his losses, and again to get whatever use he could out of his servant. Wherefore he had him do all things he could think of, whether they were of use or not. And this was the condition of Terath's mind at the time that he returned about his business, and he sought only to return everything to the way it had been before the business with Jehoiada. Now it came to pass upon the road to Bethnora that Terath encountered a mendicant Samaritan who had taken an oath to serve the Lord, and also had been living in simplicity. Now the Samaritan possessed a scroll on which was rubbed a copy of the law of Israel. Now was not customary for anyone to possess a copy of the law, except for the priest in the temple. But the Samaritan had a true copy, and bartered to teach from the law for a day's ration of bread. This pleased Terath, and he and Artemis listened to the Samaritan read from the law. Now the Samaritan was heading in another direction, and he was returning to the monastery in the south of Bethshira, where his brothers had gathered, and also had copies of the books of Moses. And among them there was also a prophet, and several who spoke in tongues, and could heal the sick. And they were gathering holy books, that they might flee the area before a coming destruction. Terath asked the Samaritan, whose name was Dename, to come again to Bethshira after a month, and to bring the holy book to read to his household, and he would feed and give him shelter. Dename agreed and departed, and Terath arrived at his destination to barter for goods, and returned again to the lands of his inheritance. When Terath returned, his father and his mother were lodged at his house, and they prepared for a banquet. When Termer, the father of Terath, had eaten, he began to ask about all things that had transpired since the last visit, and Terath began to tell him a shortened account of business. But seeing Artemis, Termer asked his son why he had not made mention of having bought a slave, and also why many of the things in the house were gone, and why the shelves of his shop were light of goods. And now Terath could not lie to his father, and told him all things that had transpired. Now Termer was alarmed at what he heard, and said for this cause Terath's wives were greatly concerned, and feared for this cause Termer had come to set right his son's affairs. Chapter 9. Now Terath did not lend at usury, but he did lend at interest to other merchants, wherefore he had some accounts open, and his father began to collect on the accounts, and also Terath still needed money to acquire goods, and therefore Termer began to draw money at interest on his son's accounts from those who had done business with his son in the past. Now he did this because Termer was a businessman, and in no way would lend to his son at interest or free of interest, but would that he conduct all things according to the manner of fair practices. And in this his son would set all things right again, drawing only the guidance of his father as he had in the beginning. And it came to pass that Termer began to negotiate for the sale of Artemis, and when Terath found this out, he bade him wait, telling him of the dream he had and the words of the prophet. Now Termer also revered the prophets, but he would that his son should sell a useless slave. Nevertheless, he relented for the moment, and took Artemis, and gave him to Gruoth, the brother of Terath, to train in the ways of merchandising. And this was acceptable to Terath, who also knew not what to do with the slave, but would that he would earn his keep. Now in this time Terath did not speak to Jeriah, for he perceived that she had called upon his father while he was away. And for this he was bitter, and also that she spent much on prophets on his account, when he already was the patron of Johann. For this Terath spent his time with Begonia and Sherry, his other wives, but went not in unto Jeriah. And this also angered Jeriah, and she had hung charms all about the house. And when Terath found them, he was angered at her sorcery. But Termer told him to disregard women's superstitions and let them be. For though he was a man of Israel, he was also a man of the world and knew women. Therefore Terath kept his peace, but he also removed what charms he could find and gave them to his son to throw away. And he gave them to his mother, and she put them back in the house. And in this way there was unspoken tension in the house of Terath. And before long, the mendicant Doname and his friends came to the house of Terath, and he made room for them and had his wives prepare food. And Jeriah came at last to Terath and said, Husband, who are these people who are now under thy roof? Do you not remember that we also host thy father and mother and thy brother, and now we feed strangers in a time of renewed labor? And Terath said, They will stay and teach the law to all in the house. And in the evening the guest taught all the people in Terath's household, and also many of his friends that he bade come and hear the law, taught in the house of Terath. And for many days this went on in the evening. And also Johann and the servants of the Lord called upon Terath, and heard the words of the Lord read from the holy books, and conversed with the monks. Now, in the due course of time, there was a discussion about the coming tribulations that had been declared by the Lord through the mouths of his servants. And Johann had also proclaimed a destruction that should come soon upon Israel. Wherefore there were many that heard him preach daily in the marketplace. And Terethia also heard the words discussed among the men. And it was customary for women to hear and remain silent, but she remembered all she heard. And Jeriah also overheard this part of the discussion, which was not discussed openly during the reading of the law. And she was displeased that evil was predicted, saying to her husband, Has not God brought enough evil upon this family? And Gonet also asked his father why the prophets cannot predict fortune instead of misfortune, if all things they said of the Lord would come true. And Jeriah lamented that her household had become a synagogue of study and discussion of wicked things, and she returned unto the wise woman to complain. Chapter 10. Now the wise woman soothed Jeriah somewhat, saying that the gods had provided for her in the administration of her husband's father. And also she was reminded that her husband would leave the house and the mercantile trade to become a mendicant and wanderer. At this, Jeriah complained that the house was now full of poor mendicants who came from a monastery to the south, where they do not work with their hands and live in such poverty that they come to her house to beg. And the man of her house gave of his substance to them freely to read from holy books. And it came to pass that Edna and Sephora consulted their crystal balls and their dice and cards. They confirmed that this was a fulfillment of their forecast, being that they would persuade Terath to join them. Now at this, Jeriah also trembled, for this too would lead to poverty and ruin, and she returned to her house to cast everyone out except for the father and brother of Terath. And when Terath returned to his home and all were gone, he scolded Jeriah and sent Gonet to retrieve them. But Gonet went instead into the marketplace and obtained wine and whatsoever he pleased. Now Artemish also heard where the men were planning to go and told it unto Terath. Wherefore he dispatched him to find Johann and his brethren, and also Dename and his brethren. And when the friends of Terath arrived, there was no one to preach the word, and Jeriah had give the command that no one prepares supper. And Terath instructed Terathea to give them all wine and bread chips and cheese, while he made apologies for the absence of supper. And he lamented because he had no teachings to give, and told it unto Terathea. And it came to pass that Terathea said unto him, Father, why do you not teach the lesson yourself? For you have heard the many words of the men of God these many days as I have. And Terath knew not what to speak unto the men, but he asked Terathea to recount to him many of the things that had been spoken before, and she accounted from her memory as she recalled with clarity. Terath was amazed at her sharp memory and her spoken voice, and said, Would that you were my son, and could go and speak for me to all my guests. And together they devised a strategy in which Terath would speak, and Terathea would come to him occasionally as if to ask a question, and would give him what to speak next. And Terath commanded her to speak of it to no one, and the girl gave her word. And it came to pass that Terathea opened the best wine in the house, and the wealthy Israelites of Bethsheba drank and discussed the law of Israel. Chapter 11. Now Dariah hated the discussion of law and prophets in her house, for she despised the poor, who presumed to be messengers of the Lord, and who would speak destruction on the city. But the father of Terath enjoyed the discussions, being a true Israelite, and also having the integrity of a man of God, and the heart of a philosopher. Wherefore to Termer the day was the time to labor, and with his hands, and the evening was a time for men to discuss the deeper things. Wherefore he did not perceive the entertainments of his son to draw him away from his labors. And without the men of God present to teach, the guests drank of the wine freely, even Terath and his father. And as they had planned, Terath led the discussion and was interrupted occasionally by Terathea in order to give him what to say next. For she recalled all the teachings of the men of God, and overheard their discussions when the men were not present. And it came to pass that in his anxiety, Terath did drink of too much wine, and began to forget what to say next. And Terathea did need to more frequently speak in his ear. And it came to pass that the men gathered did say unto Terath, Behold, you make a pretense of speaking to us, while your daughter whispers in your ear. Now at this time Terath was humiliated, and he denied everything that they charged, and stood to send Terathea away, so that he could speak on his own. And Terath's friends did make jest of his speech, so that Termer did chastise him for denying what was apparent. And the guest of Terath spoke to the girl directly, saying, Tell us truly if thy father has ordered thee to speak in his ear. And Terathea made no response, neither did she look at any of them, but waited on her father. And they bade her to speak and tell them directly what the men of Gad had said. And Terath said unto them, I did not instruct my daughter to speak to guests, but only to her father, as is fitting. But the girl has a miraculous memory. Now the men demanded that she prove what her father said, and he allowed it. And she said to the men gathered, I have never at any time before this day given any instruction or teaching to my father, nor would I. But because the men of God who were counted on to teach were not present, he asked me what I remembered of their sayings. For this cause he said that I were his son, and could speak to the men of Israel about the law and the prophets. And at this the men marveled, and bade her to speak what she remembered. And she began to recount all things that the men of God had said since the first they came into her house. Now Terath and Termer were embarrassed because of having a young girl teach about such things to esteemed guests. And Dariah chided Terath, saying, Would you make of thy daughter a rabbi? Thou might as well send her to live in the temple, for none will marry her. But the men would that she continue, for there were none present to speak as she did. Chapter 12. Now the discussion turned to the topic of the chastisement of Israel, and the men demanded of the girl why she had spoken thus, saying, "We perceive that thou would be a rabbi, and now art thou a prophetess that would speak destruction on the land." And she replied unto the men, saying, "I only do as thou command, and repeat the words I heard the men say." Now these sayings were hard, and the men were not pleased to hear them or her response. Some of them made as though to leave. But one among them, named Shulamer, said, "Brethren, do not oppress the girl, for she only remembers what she heard. She cannot comprehend what she says. Therefore be grateful that you have witnessed a most peculiar girl, and also received a lively discussion in the place of those who would have the knowledge to deliver it otherwise." And this calmed the men, and they returned to their wine and talk. And Terath departed to her room. Now Darius scolded her for making a scene, which she had overheard from the corridor. And Terath begged pardon, saying that she only did as her father commanded. And Darius excused her, saying, "Yea, thy father's not well in his mind to treat thee like this. It is not the place of a merchant tradesman to make his house into a school of prophets." And Terath answered, "Yea, mother, what is to be done?" And Darius told the girl not to worry, but to keep to her chores and pray to God that all things return to normal. And this Terath agreed to most fervently, speaking kind words, saying, "And I shall pray that father be kind to his first wife and return to her care." Now at this Terath again won the heart of her first mother, and she embraced the girl and sent her away. But Darius continued to be bitter against her husband, thinking of his unjust treatment of her and placing his favor on poor Godman over his own family. And she began administrating the potion she obtained from the wise woman, that she would make him docile and easy to control. Now Terath had commanded that Darius go not more out to the prophets and give them money, for he would give all that he had to offer to the temple, and to Johann, and to Denime, and to Dosimer, his companion. And at the end of several weeks, she sent the slave Artemis with a payment and a letter unto the wise woman of Toga, and instructed him to be quiet on the threat of beating. And it came to pass that the slave did read the letter, for he also could read Hebrew. Wherefore he became aware that the wife of his master was plotting against him. And the letter did inform them of the events that did transpire in the house of Terath, and sought more of the magic that would cure his determination to their ruin. And it came to pass that Artemis did obtain the potion, but he brought it instead to Terath, and accounted all that he knew. And Terath was furious, and demanded the truth of his wife, and she denied all, and accounted it to a mischievous slave, and began to beat him mercilessly. And Terath had compassion on him, wherefore he commanded that she stop and leave him be, and that she go to her room. And she did demand of her husband that he would not take the word of a slave over his wife, and he knew not what to say, but said that he must speak to the prophets when they return. This book is turning out to be longer than I anticipated, so I'll stop here for the day. I hope you have enjoyed the reading. Thank you for joining me, Janine, your host on Prophets of Babel.